Welcome to one of the saddest and strangest cases ever recorded in Alabama history. Before we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. We love knowing where and when these stories reach people. The big house stood all alone in the hot Alabama summer of 1846, its white columns looking like pale ghosts against the huge cotton fields around it. Evelyn Beaumont, 23 years old, had just come back to Beaumont Manor after finishing school at a fancy women's college in Boston. The wheels of her carriage crunched on the gravel driveway as she came home for the first time in 4 years. The big plantation house looked the same, but something in the air felt different, heavier, like the wet heat was hiding whispers that couldn't quite turn into words. The servants lined up to greet her, keeping their eyes down like they were supposed to, all except one, an old black woman standing at the end of the line staring hard at Evelyn. This made the young woman stop and pause. There was something familiar about her wrinkled face, but Evelyn couldn't figure out what. The woman looked to be in her 70s, with rough hands from years of hard work and a slightly bent back. When their eyes met, the old woman didn't look away like the others had. Instead, she kept staring right at Evelyn, which felt strange. "Who is that woman?" Evelyn asked her father, Judge Thaddeus Beaumont, as they walked into the big entry hall of the house. "That's just old Nora Fields," he said like it was nothing. "She's worked for this family longer than you've been alive. Don't pay her any mind." There was something odd in her father's voice, some feeling that wasn't there before. But Evelyn was excited to get comfortable at home again, so she didn't ask any more questions. The welcome home dinner that night was fancy, made by the head cook of the house. All through dinner, Evelyn told her parents stories about life in Boston and everything she'd learned there. She had come back not just educated, but polished and fancy, very different from the wide-eyed girl who had left Alabama 4 years earlier. "I've set it up for you to properly meet everyone here," her mother, Victoria Beaumont, said over dessert. "The Hendersons are having a big party next week. All the best families in the county will be there, including the Montgomerys." "Really?" Evelyn asked, sounding interested. Her father and mother looked at each other. "Yes," her father finally said. "Young William Montgomery just got back from touring Europe. I think his father is hoping to settle his future soon." The meaning was clear. At 23, Evelyn was the perfect age to get married, and the Montgomerys were one of the richest families in the state. A marriage like that would make both families even more important in Alabama society. Later that night, as Evelyn got ready for bed in her childhood room, she heard soft shuffling outside her door. She opened it and found Nora Fields standing in the dim hallway, seeming to just be staring at her door for no reason. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn asked, surprised by the old woman being there. Nora's voice was low and scratchy from age, but very clear. "Just checking to see if you need anything, Miss Evelyn. My personal maid already helped me," Evelyn answered coldly. "And in this house, servants don't wander around the family's part of the house without a reason." The old woman's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Of course, Miss Evelyn, I forget my place sometimes." She didn't leave right away. Instead, she kept looking at Evelyn's face. "You've grown up to look just like your mother." The comment seemed harmless, but it sent a strange chill down Evelyn's spine. "That will be all," she said firmly, shutting the door before Nora could answer. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Evelyn dreamed she was a baby, held in arms she didn't know, looking up at a face that felt both strange and familiar. She woke up before sunrise, sweat on her forehead even though cool night air was coming through her open windows. The dream left her feeling uneasy, and she couldn't shake it off. The next few days settled into a routine as Evelyn got used to plantation life again. Her father spent his days doing legal work in town, while her mother planned the social calendar and ran the household. Evelyn had a lot of free time, which she filled with reading in the library, playing piano in the music room, and sometimes going on supervised horse rides across the big Beaumont property. It was during one of these rides, almost a week after she came home, that Evelyn ran into Nora Fields again. The old woman was walking slowly along the edge of a cotton field, carrying what looked like herbs in a small basket. Curious and a little annoyed that this woman kept popping into her thoughts, Evelyn steered her horse toward her. "You're far from the house," Evelyn called down from her horse. "What are you doing out in the fields at this hour?" Nora looked up, shading her eyes from the sun with her hand. "Gathering herbs for medicine, Miss Evelyn. The overseer knows I'm out here." "Medicine?" Evelyn asked, doubtful. "We have a doctor in town for that." A thin smile crossed Nora's face. "Some sicknesses need cures the doctor doesn't have, knowledge passed down through many years." "You mean old superstitions?" Evelyn scoffed, her fancy Boston education making her look down on such things. "You'd be better off following modern medical advice instead of holding on to old-fashioned beliefs." If the insult hurt her, Nora didn't show it. These cures helped you through more than one fever when you were a child, Miss Evelyn. Your mother trusted them." Then the comment caught Evelyn off guard. "You never took care of me as a child. My nurse was a woman named Sarah." "Sarah came later," Nora replied, still staring steadily. "When you were 4, before that there was me." Before Evelyn could answer, her riding friend, the daughter of a neighboring plantation owner, called out to her from a few yards away. By the time Evelyn turned back, Nora had already walked on, disappearing among the tall cotton plants. That evening at dinner, Evelyn brought it up with her mother. "I talked to one of the servants today, the old woman Nora Fields. She said something strange about being my nurse when I was a baby." The crystal wine glass in Victoria Beaumont's hand stopped halfway to her lips. She set it down carefully. "Nora was in the nursery when you were very young," she admitted, "but only as a helper. Her memory isn't reliable anymore since she's so old." "She seemed pretty sure of herself," Evelyn pushed. "That's enough about the servants," her father cut in sharply. "Tell us more about your plans for the Henderson party. I heard William Montgomery has been asking about you." The sudden change of subject wasn't like her usually easygoing father, but Evelyn let the conversation move on, filing away her mother's reaction to think about later. The Henderson party finally arrived, and with it, Evelyn's official return to county society. The huge ballroom at Henderson Hall was lit by hundreds of candles, giving a warm glow over all the important people of Alabama gathered there. Evelyn, wearing a deep blue silk gown made just for the occasion, found herself the center of attention. Young men lined up to ask her to dance, while older women looked her over with calculating eyes, sizing her up as a possible wife for their sons. William Montgomery came up to talk to her during a break between dances. Tall and handsome, carrying himself like someone used to having everything, he bowed formally to her. "Miss Beaumont, you've come back to us more glowing than ever." "Boston clearly agreed with you." "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery," Evelyn replied, giving a careful smile. "I hear you just got back from Europe. How did you like it?" Their conversation flowed easily, touching on art, books, and the differences between Europe and America. William was smart and well-spoken, with perfect manners. By every measure, he'd make a great match, rich, well-connected, and from one of the oldest families in Alabama. But as they talked, Evelyn found herself distracted by someone standing at the edge of the ballroom, Nora Fields, who had come along with the Beaumont family as part of their household staff. The old woman stood against the wall, watching everything with that same unsettling intensity Evelyn had noticed since she came home. "Is something bothering you?" William asked, following her gaze. Evelyn quickly turned her attention back to him. "Not at all, just watching the party." William's eyes lingered on Nora for a moment before looking back at Evelyn. "That woman, she's been with your family a long time, hasn't she?" "So it seems, though I admit I barely remember her from when I was little." A shadow crossed William's face. "Some of these old house servants carry more history than the families they work for," he said mysteriously. Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, the orchestra started a new song, and William led her back to the dance floor. Later that night, as the Beaumont carriage rolled back toward the plantation, Evelyn found herself sitting across from Nora, who had come along to help Victoria's lady's maid. The tight space of the carriage made it impossible to avoid the old woman's steady gaze. "You danced well tonight, Miss Evelyn," Nora said out of nowhere. "Just like your mother at your age, the same grace." "Thank you," Evelyn replied stiffly, uncomfortable with how familiar Nora was being. "Young Mr. Montgomery seems taken with you," Nora went on, ignoring how clearly Evelyn wanted the conversation to stop. "His father and yours have been talking about a match for years." This surprised Evelyn. "How would you know that?" A thin smile crossed Nora's worn face. "Walls in that house have ears, and servants have always been invisible to the masters when they talk. I know more about your family than you might think, Miss Evelyn." Nora's boldness sparked anger in Evelyn. "You forget yourself," she said coldly. "It's not your place to comment on family matters or listen in on private conversations." "My place," Nora repeated slowly, like she was testing the words. "Yes, my place has always been clear to your father, less clear to you, it seems." The exchange left Evelyn feeling uneasy, a feeling that stuck with her as she got ready for bed that night. There was something in the way Nora spoke, a familiarity, an expectation of being recognized, that bothered her. It was as if the old woman believed they shared some connection that Evelyn couldn't or wouldn't admit. The next morning brought news that pushed thoughts of Nora out of Evelyn's mind for a while. William Montgomery had come to ask Judge Beaumont for permission to court his daughter, permission that was happily given right away. "The Montgomerys are hosting their summer gathering next month," her father announced at breakfast. "William has specifically asked that you come with our family. It'll be a good chance for you two to get to know each other better before anything is officially announced." Evelyn nodded, acting properly modest as she agreed, while inside she was already thinking about the benefits of such a match. The Montgomery plantation was right next to Beaumont land. Together, they would create one of the biggest combined properties in the county. Even more important, marrying William would secure her place in society and give her the freedom that came with running her own household. As the days went by, William visited Beaumont Manor regularly. Their courtship moved forward with the proper formal steps expected of people in their class: chaperoned walks through the gardens, carefully watched carriage rides, and conversations in the sitting room under Victoria Beaumont's watchful eye. William was always polite and attentive, showing his interest in Evelyn through every carefully chosen word and gesture. But through it all, Evelyn stayed aware of Nora lurking nearby. The old woman seemed to appear whenever William visited, finding reasons to walk into rooms where they were sitting or linger on the garden paths they walked. Her constant watching became more and more annoying to Evelyn. "That old servant watches you like a hawk," William said during one of their walks. "Is she supposed to be reporting on your behavior?" "She's just being rude," Evelyn replied, loud enough for Nora, who was pruning roses nearby, to hear. Some of the older servants have trouble understanding their proper place. Nora's hands paused for a moment on the rose stems, but she gave no other sign that she'd heard Evelyn's sharp comment. That night, Evelyn woke up to hushed voices outside her bedroom door. Curious, she slipped out of bed and quietly pressed her ear against the wood. "We can't keep doing this," her mother was saying, her voice tense. "She's noticing." "What would you have me do?" Her father's voice was just as strained. "After all this time, would you have me send her away?" "Of course not," Victoria hissed, "but her behavior toward Evelyn is becoming a problem. The girl is asking questions she wouldn't be asking if you had just told her the truth years ago." A third voice cut in Nora's rough voice. There was a sharp gasp from Victoria. "You forget your place, Nora." "My place?" Nora's voice grew harder. "I've earned the right to speak about this. I kept your secret all these years. I raised your child like she was nothing to me, but I won't stand here and be treated with disrespect by my own family." "Enough," Thaddeus cut in. "This conversation is over. Go back to your quarters right now." Evelyn stepped back from the door as footsteps walked away down the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what she had just heard. What secret had been kept? What claim did Nora think she had on their family? And most upsetting of all, what had Nora been about to say before her father cut her off? Sleep wouldn't come for the rest of the night. By morning, Evelyn's mind had come up with many possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. At breakfast, she studied her parents closely, noticing the dark circles under her mother's eyes and the tightness around her father's mouth. Whatever had been said during that midnight talk had shaken them both. Unable to hold her curiosity any longer, Evelyn decided to confront Nora directly. She found the old woman in the laundry house, watching over the washing of the household linens. The wet, warm air was thick with the smell of soap and steam, and a younger servant scrubbed hard at washtubs while Nora kept an eye on her. "I need to talk to you," Evelyn announced privately. Nora's face gave nothing away as she nodded and followed Evelyn outside to the shade of a big oak tree. Being far from the laundry house meant no one could overhear them. "I heard you talking with my parents last night," Evelyn began, getting straight to the point. "You mentioned a secret they've kept from me. What were you talking about?" Nora looked at her for a long moment before answering. "It's not my place to tell you that, Miss Evelyn. You seemed happy enough to talk about it last night," Evelyn shot back. "And you were about to claim some connection to me before my father stopped you. What makes you think you have the right to get involved in my family's business?" A flash of something, pain maybe or anger, crossed Nora's face. "There are things about this family, about your family, that you don't understand, things that were decided long before you were old enough to remember." "Then explain them to me," Evelyn demanded. Nora slowly shook her head. "That truth has to come from your parents, not from me. But know this, there's a bond between us that can't be broken, no matter how much you might wish otherwise." Frustrated by the mysterious answer, Evelyn felt her temper rising. "I'm tired of your riddles and your presumption. You are a servant in this house, nothing more. Whatever wild ideas you have about your importance to our family are just that, wild ideas." The words were cruel and meant to hurt, and for the first time, Evelyn saw them land. Nora flinched like she'd been physically hit, her weathered face crumpling for a moment before she pulled herself together again. "You speak about things you don't understand," Nora said quietly, "but one day you'll understand and you'll remember this moment, remember how you spoke to me." With that, she turned and walked back to the laundry house, her shoulders straight despite her age, leaving Evelyn alone under the oak tree with more questions than answers. That evening, Evelyn couldn't focus on the book she was trying to read in the library. Her mind kept going back to Nora's words and the midnight conversation she had overheard. There was a puzzle here she couldn't solve, pieces that didn't fit together in any way that made sense. The sound of her father's study door opening down the hall caught her attention. Quiet voices murmured briefly, then footsteps came toward the library. Evelyn looked up to see William Montgomery standing in the doorway, looking troubled. "William," she said, standing up from her chair, "I wasn't expecting you tonight." "Forgive me for barging in," he replied, his usual smooth confidence clearly missing. "I needed to talk to your father about something urgent. Something about the way he was acting, a coldness that wasn't there before, put Evelyn on alert." "Is everything okay?" she asked. "You seem upset." William hesitated, then walked fully into the room and shut the door behind him. "Evelyn, there are rumors going around the county, rumors about your family that have just reached my father. Given how far along our courtship is, he felt he needed to check if they were true." A chill settled in Evelyn's stomach. "What kind of rumors?" "They're about the woman Nora Fields," William said, his voice carefully controlled, "and something possibly wrong about her connection to your family." The pieces began to click together in Evelyn's mind: Nora's protective interest in her, the midnight conversation, her parents' obvious discomfort whenever the old woman was mentioned. "What exactly are you saying?" Evelyn asked, though she feared she already knew. William wouldn't meet her eyes. "My father found out from several sources that years ago your mother had complications after giving birth to you. She wasn't able to nurse you herself. Nora Fields, who had just lost her own baby, was brought in to be your wet nurse." This news wasn't shocking on its own. Wet nurses were common among wealthy families, but the careful way William was bringing it up meant there was more to say. "That hardly seems like something to worry about," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Plenty of women in our class use wet nurses." "Yes," William agreed, still avoiding her eyes. "But there are more claims that Nora Fields is actually related to your family by blood, that she's your father's half-sister, born to your grandfather and one of his slaves." The room seemed to tilt under Evelyn's feet. If true, that would make Nora her aunt, a relationship that crossed the strict racial lines that structured their whole world. Worse, it suggested a family history that would stain her own standing, her own blood. "That's ridiculous," she managed to say. "A nasty lie spread by people who envy our family's place in society." William finally looked straight at her. "I wanted to believe the same thing, but when I asked your father about it just now, he didn't deny it. In fact, his reaction basically confirmed it." Evelyn felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. The consequences were devastating, not just for her personally, but for her future, for the marriage with William that had seemed like a sure thing. "My father says he has to withdraw his blessing for our courtship," William went on, his voice softening a little. "He feels that given the circumstances, a marriage between our families wouldn't be wise." The careful wording didn't hide the rejection underneath it. In an instant, the future Evelyn had pictured, marrying William, becoming mistress of Montgomery Plantation, being respected and envied by county society, had disappeared. "I see," she said, fighting to stay composed. "And you, William, do you agree with your father's decision?" A flash of real regret crossed his face. "I haven't been given any choice in this, Evelyn. Family duty has to come before what I might personally want." He paused, then added more softly, "For what it's worth, I really am sorry." With that, he bowed formally and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Evelyn stood frozen in place as the full weight of what had just happened settled over her. Then, as her shock turned into anger, she turned and swept out of the library, ready to confront her parents. She found them in her father's study, their faces serious. They looked up as she burst in without knocking, all her composure gone in the face of this betrayal. "Is it true?" she demanded, not bothering with a greeting. "Is Nora Fields your half-sister?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Her father sank back in his chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. Her mother turned away, unable to meet Evelyn's accusing stare. "Why was I never told?" Evelyn pressed, her voice shaking. "Why keep this secret only for it to come out now and ruin my chances?" "We wanted to protect you," her father finally said, "to keep you away from problems that would only bring pain." "Protect me?" Evelyn's laugh was sharp and bitter. "William Montgomery just told me his father has pulled his support for our courtship because of rumors about our family." "Rumors you apparently confirmed instead of denying. How is that protecting me?" Victoria turned back around, her face pale but calm. "We had hoped this would stay private, that the few who knew would keep quiet out of respect for your father's position." "And when exactly were you planning to tell me?" Evelyn demanded. "After I got married, or maybe never. You have to understand how delicate this situation is," her father began. "What I understand," Evelyn cut in, "is that you let this scandal build up until it exploded at the worst possible moment. Did it ever occur to you that I deserve to know the truth about my own family?" Her mother stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but Evelyn pulled away. Evelyn, please, we only wanted what was best for you, to give you every advantage without complications. Complications? Evelyn repeated bitterly. Is that what you call it when your husband's enslaved half-sister nurses your baby? A complication? The cruelty in her words hung in the air. Victoria flinched like she'd been struck. Nora is a member of this family, Thaddeus said firmly. No matter the circumstances of her birth, she's been given respect and a place in this household that recognizes her connection to us. A place, Evelyn's voice rose in disbelief. You gave her a place as a servant, as someone I could order around and dismiss whenever I wanted. How is that recognizing her as family? Her father's face hardened. You don't understand the realities we've had to deal with, the compromises that were needed to protect everyone involved. The society we live in doesn't allow people to openly admit relationships like this. What I understand, Evelyn said coldly, is that you let me treat my own aunt, my own blood, with contempt, to mock her, to dismiss her as nothing more than a used-up servant. And by doing that, you've now ruined my future too. Without waiting for an answer, Evelyn turned and left the study, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. The house that had felt so familiar when she came home now felt like foreign ground, full of secrets and lies she never suspected. She found herself wandering the halls with no real destination, as if seeing them for the first time. Servants, people she'd barely thought about before, beyond their usefulness, glanced at her curiously as she passed, maybe noticing how upset she was. Had they all known the truth about Nora while she stayed in the dark? Eventually, Evelyn's steps led her to the small group of cabins behind the main house where the household servants lived. She had never been to this part of the property before, had never had a reason to. Now she stood in front of the door of the cabin she somehow knew belonged to Nora, hesitating before she raised her hand to knock. The door opened to show Nora, still dressed despite how late it was. She didn't look surprised to find Evelyn there, as if she'd been expecting this visit. "May I come in?" Evelyn asked, her voice stripped of its earlier sharpness. Nora stepped back silently, letting Evelyn into the small, tidy cabin. A single oil lamp cast warm light over the sparse furniture, a narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest for clothes. On the wall hung a simple cross, and next to it a small faded photograph in a wooden frame. Evelyn moved closer to look at the picture. It showed a much younger Nora standing beside a seated white woman holding a baby. With a jolt, Evelyn recognized her mother as the seated woman, which meant the baby was her. "That was taken when you were 6 months old," Nora said quietly from behind her. "Your mother insisted on it, even though your father was against the idea, said it wasn't proper." Evelyn turned to face her, seeing the old woman, her father's half-sister, her aunt, truly for the first time. "I know the truth," she said simply, "about our connection." Nora nodded, not surprised. "I figured you might, given all the noise in the house tonight. Why didn't you just tell me directly?" Evelyn asked. "All those times you tried to talk to me when you watched me, why not just say who you were?" A sad smile touched Nora's lips. "It wasn't my place to tell you. Your parents made that clear from the start. They were afraid of what that knowledge would mean for your future." "My future's already ruined," Evelyn said bitterly. "William Montgomery's father has pulled his blessing for our courtship because of the rumors." "I'm sorry for that," Nora replied, and she seemed to genuinely mean it, "though I never thought he was worthy of you." Evelyn sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. "All these years I never knew, and you," she looked up at Nora, really seeing her for the first time, "you nursed me as a baby, took care of me, and I treated you with such disrespect." "You didn't know," Nora said simply, taking the chair across from Evelyn. "You were raised to see the world a certain way, to see people like me a certain way." "That's no excuse," Evelyn whispered. "I should have seen you as a person, no matter what our relationship was." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of unspoken truth hanging between them. "Tell me about when I was a baby," Evelyn finally said. "Tell me what you remember." Nora's eyes softened with the memory. "You were a strong baby from the start, determined. Your mother had a hard delivery and couldn't nurse you herself. I had just lost my own child, a little girl who came too early and couldn't stay. Your father asked me to be your wet nurse." She paused, her gaze distant. "In some ways, you saved me as much as I fed you, giving you my milk, holding you against my heart. It helped heal the pain of losing my daughter." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes at the simple story. "And after that, when I got older, I stayed in the nursery until you were 4, when Sarah took over caring for you. By then you were old enough for proper schooling fitting your station." The lack of bitterness in Nora's voice was maybe the most painful thing of all. "I watched you grow up from a distance after that, watched you become a proud, accomplished young lady." "Did you ever resent it?" Evelyn asked. "Being pushed to the background of my life after being so central to it when I was little?" Nora thought about the question carefully. "There were moments," she admitted, times when I saw you struggling or unhappy and wished I could comfort you like I used to, times when your mother made choices for you that I might have made differently, but mostly I was grateful just to stay close enough to watch you grow." The honesty of the answer broke something open in Evelyn's chest, a tight knot of privilege and assumption that had been at her core for as long as she could remember. "I don't know how to move forward from here," she confessed. "Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, myself, it's all been turned upside down." "Truth has that power," Nora agreed softly, "but it also gives you a chance to build something new on more solid ground." Outside the cabin, an owl called into the night. Inside, aunt and niece sat together, beginning the slow work of untangling a lifetime of secrets and building a new understanding in their place. The road ahead was unclear, full of complications neither of them could fully predict, but for the first time they were facing it together, the truth between them like a bridge across water that used to seem impossible to cross. In the months that followed, Beaumont Manor saw small but important changes. Nora Fields was quietly moved from the servants' quarters to a small room next to the family wing, a change that raised eyebrows among the household staff but wasn't questioned, thanks to Judge Beaumont's authority. Evelyn, her social chances in the county now damaged by the spreading rumors, pulled back from society events and instead spent her time reading in her father's law library. The relationship between Evelyn and Nora grew slowly and carefully. Years of old habits couldn't be undone overnight. There were missteps and painful moments as Evelyn faced how deep her earlier prejudice had gone, but there were also discoveries of shared traits, common interests, a family resemblance that now seemed obvious once Evelyn let herself see it. By the spring of 1847, Judge Beaumont had made plans for Evelyn to travel north to Philadelphia, where distant cousins had agreed to introduce her to society there, a society a bit more accepting of complicated family histories than the strict social rules of Alabama. Before she left, Evelyn visited Nora's new room, bringing a small wooden box with her. "I want you to have this," she said, placing the box in Nora's hands. Inside was the cameo brooch Evelyn had worn when she came back from Boston, jewelry her mother had given her to mark her coming of age. "I can't accept this," Nora protested. "It's too valuable." "Its value is in what it stands for," Evelyn replied firmly. "A recognition of our connection. I promise that no matter where I go, I'll carry the truth of our family with me." Nora's worn fingers closed around the cameo. "Then I accept it in that spirit." As Evelyn got ready to leave, Nora spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "Your grandfather, our father, would never admit to me in public, but in private moments when no one else could see, he would call me daughter. Just once before you go, I'd like to hear you call me aunt." Evelyn turned back, seeing in Nora's eyes the weight of a lifetime of being denied recognition. "Goodbye, Aunt Nora," she said, the words strange but right on her tongue. "I will write to you from Philadelphia." She kept that promise. Letters passed between them regularly in the years that followed, letters that Nora, who had taught herself to read despite laws banning literacy among slaves, treasured and kept safe. When Judge Beaumont died in 1853, his will included a part that gave Nora her freedom and a small yearly payment, finally a public recognition of her place in the family. Evelyn never moved back to Alabama for good. She married a Philadelphia doctor in 1849 and settled into Northern society, where her complicated family history became a carefully guarded secret rather than a big scandal. But she came back to Beaumont Manor for visits, bringing her children to meet their great Aunt Nora, making sure the next generation would know the truth from the very beginning. The story of Evelyn Beaumont and Nora Fields might have been completely forgotten, lost in the shadows of history like so many similar stories from that time. But in 1964, during renovations to the old Beaumont Manor, a bundle of letters was found hidden inside a wall. Letters that told the story of the relationship between the white plantation daughter and her black aunt. The letters, spanning more than 20 years, gave a rare first-hand look at a family that had navigated the difficult waters of race, blood ties, and social expectations in the pre-Civil War South. Historians who studied the letters noted one line in particular, written by Evelyn to Nora in 1857. In it, she wrote about often thinking of that summer she came home from Boston, so full of pride and ignorance, and how differently she might have acted if she'd known than what she knew now. She wrote that the greatest cruelty, she'd come to believe, wasn't deliberate meanness, but the careless dismissal of another person's humanity, and that even though Nora had long forgiven her for it, she kept trying to make up for it through how she lived and what she taught her children. The Beaumont Fields letters, as they became known, were donated to the State Historical Society, where they remain today, proof of the complicated humanity that existed inside the harshly rigid social rules of the pre-Civil War South. The last letter in the collection, dated October 1861, right as the Civil War was beginning to tear the country apart, is believed by historians to hold Evelyn's final written words to her aunt. In it, she wrote that as the country fell into the madness of war, she found herself thinking of that summer night in Nora's cabin, when the truth finally came out of the shadows. She wondered how many other truths were still hidden under the surface of their society, how many other families carried similar secrets, and whether the terrible war now upon them might break open more than just the system of slavery. Perhaps, she wrote, it would also break open the silence that had let so many lies pretend to be the natural order of things. Nora Fields died in 1863 at an estimated age of 93, having lived to see the Emancipation Proclamation, but not the end of the war. According to local church records, Evelyn traveled back to Alabama for her funeral, a risky trip during wartime, and arranged for Nora to be buried not in the separate cemetery for slaves and free black people, but in a small plot right next to the Beaumont family cemetery. The headstone, simple but dignified, read, "Nora Fields, beloved aunt and faithful guardian." The discovery of these records in 1962 caused a lot of controversy in the local historical community. Some people dismissed the story as impossible, calling it made up or a misunderstanding of the evidence. Others pointed to similar cases across the South, where blood ties crossed racial lines and created family connections that defied the social order while staying mostly invisible in the historical record. What is certain is that the renovation work that uncovered the letters also revealed something else, a small hidden space under the floorboards in what had once been Nora's room in the family wing. Inside was a carefully kept baby gown made of fine cotton and lace, the kind worn by babies of wealthy families for their christening. Pinned to it was a note in Nora's handwriting, worn by Evelyn Ann Beaumont, September 3, 1823, "The day I first held her to my heart." How carefully this piece of clothing was kept, hidden right inside the walls of the house, shows both how deep Nora's attachment was and how necessary it felt to keep such feelings hidden. What's still unclear from the historical record is whether Victoria Beaumont, Evelyn's mother, fully knew about the blood relationship between her husband and Nora when she chose her as wet nurse for her baby daughter. Some historians think the choice may have been deliberate on Judge Beaumont's part, a way to quietly recognize his half-sister while still keeping up the public pretense that she was just a house servant. In a journal entry dated 1858, Evelyn wrote that her mother had confessed to her that day that she had in fact known about her father's relationship to Nora from the very beginning of their marriage. It was one of the conditions Evelyn's grandfather had set. Her mother told her she would never speak of it openly, but that she would make sure Nora stayed part of the household and was treated with whatever kindness could be shown without raising suspicion. When Evelyn asked why her mother had chosen Nora as her wet nurse, her mother grew quiet for a long moment. Because, she finally said, "I thought it might heal something broken in both of them, in Nora, who had lost her child, and in your father, who could never publicly admit he had a sister. Maybe it was selfish of me to use you as the tool for that healing, but I believed then, as I believe now, that it was the right choice." The tangled web of decisions, hidden secrets, and partial acknowledgments that shaped the relationship between the Beaumonts and Nora Fields reflects the twisted contradictions of a society built on racial hierarchy, yet full of blood connections that crossed those same lines. Judge Thaddeus Beaumont, by all accounts a respected judge who upheld the laws that supported slavery, was, at the same time, the half-brother of an enslaved woman whom he both protected and controlled. Victoria Beaumont, raised in the strict racial beliefs of her time, still found ways to create space for human connection across those rigid lines. And Evelyn, who started out being the most traditional in her attitudes, ended up being the one to challenge the system most directly, first by privately recognizing Nora as family, and later by raising her own children with full knowledge of their great aunt. The summer of 1846 marked not just Evelyn's return to Alabama after her schooling, but the start of a deep unraveling of certainty, a process that would eventually lead her to question the basic assumptions about family, race, and her own identity. The journey from her early careless cruelty toward Nora to their eventual peace mirrors on a small scale, the bigger reckoning the Civil War would soon force onto the South as a whole. After the war, Beaumont Manor, like many plantation homes, fell into decline. The end of slavery made its economic foundation impossible to keep up, and the family's fortune shrank along with it. By 1870, the property had been sold to pay off debts, leaving the Beaumont family's hands for the first time in 3 generations. The new owners, a family from the north with money from industry, had little interest in preserving its history or keeping ties to the people who had lived there before. Evelyn, by then a widow with 3 grown children, made one final visit to the property in 1875. According to a letter she wrote to her oldest son, the experience was both painful and eye-opening, seeing other children run through those halls, other voices echoing where her own family once spoke, created a strange sense of displacement. Yet, she wrote, there was something fitting about the change, that the house that once stood for the old order now sheltered people who represented something new, and maybe it was better this way, that the stones and wood outlived the systems of thinking that built them, becoming a home for different dreams and different possibilities. The most intriguing part of the Beaumont Field story, though, doesn't come from the 1800s at all, but from a set of interviews done in 1966 with elderly people in the county who said they had heard stories passed down about the family. One woman interviewed, Dorothy Clemens, then 87 years old, told a story her grandmother used to tell. Her grandmother used to say that when they were tearing down parts of the old Beaumont place for renovation, sometime around 1920, workers found something strange in the wall of what used to be the nursery, a little cloth doll, old-fashioned looking, with 2 faces stitched onto it, one side white, one side black. Pinned to it was a small piece of paper with writing so faded that nobody could read it. The foreman took it home, meaning to show it to someone from the Historical Society. That night his house caught fire and burned all the way to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes. Some people said it was just an old child's toy, but Dorothy's grandmother always said it was something Nora Fields had made, a way of telling a truth nobody was allowed to say out loud. Like many stories that mix documented history with word-of-mouth tradition, the tale of the 2-faced doll can't be proven. No mention of such an object appears in any official records of renovations to the property. Yet the story stuck around in local memory, maybe a symbol of the double identities and hidden truths that shaped the Beaumont family. In 1959, a historian researching links between well-known Southern families found court records from 1835, 11 years before Evelyn's return from Boston, in which Judge Beaumont had successfully asked the court to stop the sale of one enslaved woman, Nora, and her baby daughter, when his father's estate was being settled. The request cited special circumstances and moral duty as reasons for keeping these particular, enslaved people out of the general sale. The baby daughter mentioned in the document is believed to be the child Nora later lost, the stillborn girl she mentioned to Evelyn during their talk in the cabin. The court's decision to grant Judge Beaumont's request was unusual for its time and shows both how much influence he had in local legal circles and the quiet, unspoken recognition of Nora's blood tied to the family. This document, when looked at alongside the later discovery of the Beaumont Fields letters, gives a fuller picture of the judge's complicated position, enforcing the very legal system that enslaved his half-sister, while at the same time working inside that system to offer her whatever limited protection he could. A diary kept by a neighboring plantation owner's wife, discovered in 1964 among family papers, has a short but telling entry from September 1823. In it, she describes visiting Victoria Beaumont to pay her respects after the birth of her daughter, finding her in good spirits though still weak. She noted that the baby was being nursed by a mixed-race woman named Nora who cared for the child with unusual devotion. She wrote that there were whispers among the servants about the arrangement, but that Judge Beaumont silenced such talk with a sharpness that gave her pause, and she couldn't help but wonder what truths lay beneath such strong denial. This observation, made at the time by someone outside the family but close enough to see their day-to-day life, adds credibility to the relationships described in the later letters between Evelyn and Nora. It suggests that even at the time of Evelyn's birth, there were already suspicions about Nora's connection to the Beaumont family, suspicions carefully managed through Judge Beaumont's authority and white society's willingness to keep comfortable lies rather than face uncomfortable truths. The story might have stayed something only academic historians cared about, if not for a discovery made in 1968 while cataloging materials at the Philadelphia Historical Society. Among the papers of Dr. James Winthrop, Evelyn's husband, researchers found a small leather-bound journal Evelyn kept between 1850 and 1855. Journal, written in a candid style clearly not meant for anyone else to read, held her thoughts on her life in Philadelphia and her ongoing letters with Nora. One entry from March 1852 talks about getting a letter from Aunt Nora that day, bringing news from Alabama that felt both far away and close at the same time. Nora wrote about changes to the house, about her father's declining health, about the garden she now tended since her mother had given her more say over household matters. Between the lines, Evelyn read a different story of a woman finally claiming small pieces of the dignity that should have always been hers. Nora ended her letter with words that haunted Evelyn, that in dreams she sometimes forgot the world as it really was and imagined them instead as sisters raised together, sharing secrets and sorrows without the weight of everything that kept them apart. Evelyn wrote that she wept reading this because in Nora's simple words was an accusation against her whole society, the world that had shaped her and that she still, uneasily, lived inside. The journal showed that Evelyn's relationship with Nora had deeply changed how she saw the world, leading her to quietly support the movement to end slavery in Philadelphia while still keeping up the social appearances needed to protect her position and family. It also suggested that her choice to stay in the North after marriage wasn't just about social opportunity, but also a growing moral discomfort with the basic ideas holding up Southern society. Maybe most importantly, the journal confirmed that Evelyn had indeed told her children about Nora, introducing her not as a former slave, but as their grandfather's sister, their great-aunt, a woman of remarkable strength and dignity. This deliberate choice, this insistence on recognizing family bonds across the racial lines Southern society treated as absolute, was a quiet but powerful rejection of the beliefs that had shaped Evelyn's early years. The last pages of Evelyn's journal, written after Nora's death in 1863, hold a passage historians point to as especially telling. In it, Evelyn wrote that with Aunt Nora's passing, a chapter of their family history had closed, a chapter written in whispers and shadows, in glances and silences, in truths admitted only in the most private moments. But she was determined that what came next would be different. Her children would know Nora's name, her story, her place in the family. They would know that their blood wasn't the pure European line that society valued so highly, but a river with many streams feeding into it, some deliberately erased from the map. And maybe in knowing this, they would find their way to a more honest relationship with both the past and the future. This choice to acknowledge, rather than erase, the complicated racial history of her family set Evelyn apart from many people of her time, who often went to great lengths to hide or deny such connections. Her choice wasn't free of cost. Certain parts of Philadelphia society stayed closed off to her, and her husband's medical practice reportedly lost patients when rumors about Nora's connection to the family sometimes surfaced. Yet, according to letters between Evelyn and her oldest son in the 1880s, she never regretted her decision to honor the truth of her family's history. The 1964 discoveries at Beaumont Manor happened at the same time as intense civil rights activity across Alabama and the South. For many, the story of Evelyn Beaumont and Nora Fields became a powerful reminder of how made up the fixed racial categories really were that had been presented as unchangeable, a real-life example of how blood ties crossed the very lines society insisted were absolute. The news that a prominent white family like the Beaumonts had black relatives wasn't really surprising to the black community, who had kept such knowledge alive through spoken history, even when written records were destroyed or hidden. But the proof provided by the Beaumont Fields letters gave undeniable evidence that complicated the story many white Alabamians had grown up believing. In 1965, when the letters were first shown publicly at the State Historical Society, people's reactions ranged from denial to fascination to deep discomfort. One elderly woman was overheard saying that her grandmother always said the old families had secrets darker than anyone would talk about, and it seemed she was right all along. A young civil rights activist interviewed by a local newspaper said these letters just proved what people already knew, that the lines drawn between black and white were lines in sand, not lines in stone. The bigger meaning of the Beaumont Fields story lies in what it shows about racial identity in the pre-Civil War United States, not as the fixed biological fact it was claimed to be, but as a made-up social idea kept alive through silence, denial, and carefully managed public performances. The letters between Evelyn and Nora don't just record their personal peacemaking, but a deep questioning of the categories that shaped their whole society. A historian writing in 1966 noted that what makes the Beaumont Fields letters so valuable isn't just how rare it is to have documentation of cross-racial family ties, but the change they show in Evelyn Beaumont's thinking, moving from blindly accepting the racial hierarchy to recognizing how deeply dishonest it was, a journey pushed forward not by big ideas but by a real personal connection. In her growing relationship with Nora Fields, we see the human truth underneath the rigid social structures of that time, the bonds of blood and love that survived despite every effort to deny them. The physical structure of Beaumont Manor itself became a symbol of this hidden history. The hidden compartments, the letters sealed inside the walls, the carefully saved baby gown, all pointed to truths too dangerous to show openly, yet too important to throw away. The house's architecture of secrecy mirrored the architecture of silence within Southern society as a whole, where knowledge of interracial family connections often existed as an open secret known by many, yet denied by all. What remains most touching about the story, though, is its personal, human side. Beyond its historical importance, it's fundamentally the story of two women dealing with a relationship shaped by deep social contradiction. Nora, who nursed and loved a child she couldn't publicly claim as her own family, and Evelyn, who had to unlearn a lifetime of conditioned habits to finally recognize the aunt who had always seen her clearly. In a letter written to Nora in 1851, Evelyn looked back on the summer of her return to Alabama. She wrote that she often thought about how blind she had been then, how cruel in that blindness that she had looked at Nora and seen only what she'd been taught to see. Now, she wrote, she understood that the greatest trick their society had played was making people unable to recognize their own family, dividing them not just from those seen as other, but from the truth of their own connections. In finding Nora as her aunt, she wrote, she had also found a more honest version of herself. The last known photograph of Evelyn Beaumont Winthrop, taken in Philadelphia around 1890, shows an elderly woman sitting in a garden, surrounded by her grown children and grandchildren. Pinned to her lapel is a cameo brooch that family records confirm was the very same one she had given Nora decades earlier, returned to her after her aunt's death, and worn from then on as a quiet tribute to a connection that had changed how she understood both family and herself. Nora Fields left no direct descendants since her only child had been stillborn. Yet her influence carried on through Evelyn's children and grandchildren, who grew up knowing the story of their great-aunt and everything her life represented. According to family papers, Evelyn's oldest granddaughter, born in 1874, was given the middle name Nora, a public recognition of the relationship that had once been hidden behind walls of silence. Today, Beaumont Manor no longer stands. The building was destroyed by fire in 1973, leaving only the foundation and chimney stacks as proof of what once was there. The land has since been developed for business use, with no marker to show the human dramas that once played out there. The Beaumont family cemetery was moved, the graves relocated to a public cemetery in the nearby town. Nora's grave, sitting just outside the family plot, was moved along with the others, the physical separation kept in place even during this final move. Yet the story of Evelyn Beaumont and Nora Fields lives on, kept alive in letters, journals, and the scattered pieces of evidence from lives that refused to be neatly labeled. Their shared history reminds us that beneath what we think we know about the past, beneath the simplified stories of separation and difference, lie complicated webs of connection, blood ties that cross the very lines meant to keep them apart. In her final letter to her son, written shortly before her death in 1892, Evelyn reflected on what she had learned through her relationship with Nora. She wrote that once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. It stays with you, changing how you see everything that comes after. Looking back on the young woman she once was, so sure of her place in the world, so confident in her understanding of its order, she wrote that she hardly recognized her anymore. Nora, she wrote, had given her more than food as a baby. In the end, Nora had given her the gift of uncertainty. The ability to question what she'd been taught was beyond questioning. This, she said, had been both a burden and a freedom, but she wouldn't trade it for the false comfort of never questioning anything. Maybe this is the most lasting legacy of the Beaumont Fields story, the recognition that certainty, especially about categories of human identity, might be the most dangerous illusion of all. In the changing relationship between a plantation daughter and the aunt she was taught to see as a servant, we catch a glimpse of the possibility of recognizing each other across boundaries built specifically to stop that kind of connection. A reminder that the rigid structures of society, no matter how permanent they seem, are in the end vulnerable to the simple, revolutionary power of one human being truly seeing another.